The final goal is to change the church in its structure and to change the church in its doctrine. In every time there is a major issue that serves as a battering ram to infiltrate and to break down the church. The homosexual agenda is like a battering ram that is being used, but the final goal, it's much broader.
There's a brand new book out called The Breached Dam, the Fiducia Supplicans Surrender to the Homosexual Movement. Well, Mr. Julio Loredo, who is the co-author of the book, is going to be on the program at 30 past the hour. Is this breached dam, this Fiducia Supplicans, is this just one step on the journey to where exactly? What's the end goal? Well, the end game is coming.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Mr. Julio Loredo is on with us. He's a journalist, a writer, speaker, college professor. Let's talk about Fiducia Supplicans. Is this the penultimate goal, or is this just one more rung in the ladder towards an end game? And if so, what is the goal of this lobby?
Well, the final goal is to change the church in its structure and to change the church in its doctrine. Now, if we see the history, and by history I mean really centuries, of the infiltration of evil and the battle of evil against the church, we see that in every time there is a major issue that serves as a battering ram to infiltrate and to break down the church. I say break down because to destroy the church, as we know, is impossible. For example, in the 19th century, especially here in Europe, it was liberalism. Then it was modernism. Then it was the so-called Nouvelle Théologie, communism, etc., etc. Now we are in the phase of the cultural revolution, which has as its main issues the LGBT agenda, abortion, homosexual rights, etc. So what they actually want is to use the momentum they are having today in this present historical era in order to batter away at the church, in order to attempt to destroy it, as I said, in its structure and in its doctrine. Now, the homosexual agenda, or broadly speaking it more broadly, the LGBT agenda, is like a battering ram that is being used, but the final goal is much broader. Unfortunately, the use of low-level language has been a constant in this pontificate, not only with Pope Francis, but also with Cardinal Fernandez, who even said a straight four-lettered word during one of the press conference last week or 2 weeks ago. Now, the problem is, when the Vatican finally issued a mea culpa, asking pardon for the use of that word, they didn't ask pardon for the use of foul language in a pope's mouth. They asked pardon to those who might have felt condemned, accused by that word, and the Pope doubled the doses, as we say here, doubled the doses when he said, no, my position is everybody is welcome in the church. Now, everybody, he was obviously speaking about the homosexuals, because that was the subject of the communiqué by the Vatican. So by saying everybody is welcome in the church, he was obviously speaking of the homosexuals. Now, at what part? Where are we in this battle? As you know, in military doctrine, it counts very much to disarray your enemy, and to not only to have the strength to attack your enemy, but to disarray and put chaos into his defenses. What we are having today is exactly confusion, chaos, contradiction. Well, nobody knows anything and nobody knows what's going on. In this general chaos, the LGBT agenda is advancing. And this is the point we are now.
Take me back to the beginning of this lobby. How far back does this active push towards changing church's teaching on homosexuality, its reality, and then, of course, its practical implication in the priest's life or the hierarchy of the church, let alone in marriage, etc.?
Well, I would take you back to the 1950s and 1960s, where an ambience of tolerance began to take over the church, coming in from the secular world. And secular society after World War II had a very strong expansion, wealth and richness, etc. And in this ambience of optimism also infiltrated the church. It was no longer the time for condemnations like St. Pius X against modernism. So the homosexual practices began to be tolerated. They began not to be so forcibly persecuted as they were before. This ambience of toleration then came to the 1960s with the sexual revolution. So the sexual revolution exploded inside the church. Cardinal Ratzinger has a very eye-opening article in a German church newspaper called Klerusblatt, and he gives names and information. He gives his proofs. Already in the 1960s, the first homosexual groups, and let's call them little lobbies, began to appear in Catholic seminaries. We're speaking of the 1960s. Now, after the tolerance and after the first infiltration began to appear the doctrinal justifications. So we have Father John McClellan, for example, in 1970, and several others, which whom we analyze in our books. So already beginning in 1969, 1970, they began to publish books on theology and moral theology, trying to justify homosexual conduct. With sophisms like, for example, God created everything, so everything that is in creation comes from God. If there are homosexuals come from God. So if I'm a homosexual, that's a God-given situation. And that began in the 1970s and 1980s. What changed with Pope Francis is all the way down to Pope Francis, the hierarchical church, meaning the Vatican, had always a very clear stance of condemnation of this current, of this movement. We have the document Persona Humana during Paul VI's pontificate, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It was Cardinal Grocholewski back then. Then we have under Cardinal Ratzinger the letter to all the bishops in the world about the pastoral cure of homosexual people, etc., etc. We have a whole series of documents and a whole series of censorship against this homosexual movement. What changed radically with Pope Francis is that these documents are no longer published. Indeed, homosexuals are more and more accepted in practice and in theory, meaning in pastorally and now also doctrinally. We know that there is a document, the Responsum ad Dubium 2021, that said no blessings for homosexuals, but this was an exception. This was really an exception. If you see the history of Pope Francis' pontificate, it is a history of concession and concession to the homosexual movement. The issue is not marriage. I mean, if you say no, but we uphold the traditional Catholic doctrine on marriage between a man and a woman, that's not the issue. The issue is that you are authorizing the blessing of a situation which is objectively sinful. Blessing comes from benedire, to say well, to invoke God's love and God's grace upon someone or upon a situation. Now, Fiducia Supplicans authorizes the benediction, that the dire bene, to say good, of a situation which is objectively sinful. Now, people say, no. They just authorize the benediction for the single persons, not for the couple. Now, the problem is that either they haven't read the Fiducia Supplicans, or they don't, I don't know, because the Fiducia Supplicans says benediction to irregular and homosexual couples. First of all, I can confirm that the book is freely downloadable, so you can download it for free. If you want the printed copy, then you have to pay for print book. Now, what can a layman do? What can a lay person do? Now, I'm saying people get a bit shocked when I say this, that we're living a very privileged moment. Privileged because, using the classic metaphor, the classic image, the frog finally realized that the water is boiling. You know, I don't know if you use that metaphor in the United States.
Yeah.
They say that if you throw a frog into boiling water, it will just slip out of it. But if you put it in cold water and then heat the water, warm it up, he will die, because he will never decide himself when to jump out of the pan. So he dies. Now, that's what has been happening. The crisis inside the church has been going along step by step, and people have not realized what was going on in 360 degrees. I mean, a full vision of the crisis inside the church. With the Fiducia Supplicans and the whole explosion of the homosexual issue, people have finally realized that there's something very wrong going on. Well, this is the moment to do two things. First of all, to renew our faith, as you said perfectly well, in our Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, our Mother, our Savior, the Church through which we are going to heaven, with the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, which comes to us through Our Lady. It's the time to be faithful. It's the time to be really strong in our faith. And especially strong when the whole building sort of crumbling down before our eyes. We still have to believe in that building, because that building is sacred. But the second point is, as they say in modern language, to bear witness. We would better say to do apostolate, or to do militant apostolate. That is, to show, and that's what we do in this book, because when a dam finally breaks, when a dam finally explodes, it's because there has been an underlying process of weakening of the structures. The engineers that build a dam, when it explodes, they have to go and analyze what were the causes, what were the infiltrations, the little cracks that began to appear, etc., the structural problems. At a certain point, the dam exploded, the dam broke down, and it flooded the whole place. Now, we have to realize that this was the result of a certain process of infiltration and decadence, and we cannot solve it just by going the day before the dam broke down. And that is the main point. We cannot solve the problem by going down to the day before. We have to go back to the root problems of what's going on, and that's what we try to do in the book. So, as I said, it's a privileged moment, because it's a moment that permits us to show forth our Catholic faith in a way that perhaps never before had been done. And in the second sense, it's a privileged time, because we finally can show people that the problem is much deeper than, there's much more to it than it actually shows.
Do you think that this lobby has reached its pinnacle power, its pinnacle influence under this current pontificate? And do you think that the next pontificate might be able to scale that back?
The thing is, it's not so much the power in the sense of domination, to dominate the whole situation, but power in the sense of instilling confusion. Instilling confusion and chaos in those who should defend the church. Now, people here in Rome are speaking, the analysts, the so-called Vaticanists, like Michael Haynes, for example, they are more and more speaking that the real problem will not be who will be the next pope, but will the next pope manage to reconstruct the unity of the church? Because that's what's going on today. It's a destruction of the very fabric of the church. For example, to see or to hear a pope use that type of language, which not even a decent person should use, shocks. And it puts into trial the whole idea that you have about the papacy. Now, the next pope, will he be able to reconstruct the image of the papacy? This is the real problem that so many analysts are asking themselves. I mean, it's not so much who will be the next pope, but will the next pope be able to rebuild the unity and the image of the church?
We've lost trust in the hierarchy of the church. We don't trust what comes out of the Vatican anymore. We always question, we're doubting. Do you think that trust can be restored?
Through grace, yes. As it is now, humanly speaking, I think it will take a long time. And that is the main problem. I had a long conversation some years ago with Bishop Luigi Negri. He was Archbishop of Ferrara here in Italy. He was a very intelligent person. He was vice rector of the Catholic University of Milan, a very high level intellectual. And he said, I'm very worried with Pope Francis. And this was way back in 2017 or 18. He said, I'm very worried because he's destroying the foundations of the faith. You see, the faith, as St. Paul tells us, is a rationabile obsequium. It's a gift of reason. Faith is based on it stands on reason. It's not theologically speaking based on reason, but it stands on reason. Reason and faith go together, as Pope John Paul II says, fides et ratio, faith and reason. Now, when you destroy, and reason has to work with certainty. Reason has to work with truth. When you destroy the very possibility of having certainties, like the one you said, for example, the credibility of the Vatican, when you destroy the possibility of having credibility of the Vatican, the whole edifice, the whole building just rocks.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.